So, you've probably seen the headlines. A diplomatic boycott, some really serious accusations, and a geopolitical showdown that could genuinely shake up the global order. Donald Trump has just taken aim at South Africa and the G20, but trust me, the headlines are only scratching the surface. Okay, let's get into it and find out what's really going on behind the scenes.
It all kicked off with this one line, dropped during a pretty fiery speech down in Miami. With just those few words, Donald Trump didn't just criticize a nation, he basically questioned its entire place among the world's top economies. And yeah, that set off a global firestorm.
And you know, he didn't stop with just words. Things escalated fast. Trump immediately announced that no U.S. official would be setting foot in Johannesburg for the G20 summit. This wasn't just some polite diplomatic snub. This was a real declaration of defiance.
You can imagine, this sent absolute shockwaves through diplomatic circles. But while all the headlines are focused on the boycott itself, the real question is, why? This whole thing feels like a strategic power play, and it's looking like the official reasons might just be a smokescreen for something else entirely. So let's take a look at the official justification coming out of Washington. The whole case is basically built on three core arguments, three pillars that are supposed to form the foundation of this entire policy.
Right. So these three pillars are designed to paint a very, very specific picture of South Africa. You've got this incredibly explosive claim of a white genocide, then you have a formal executive order to back it up, and finally accusations of communist tyranny. Let's break each one down.
Okay, the first pillar is by far the most inflammatory. It's the claim of a state-sponsored slaughter of white farmers. The source material even mentions that Trump played unverified video clips in an Oval Office meeting as some kind of proof. Whether it's based in fact or not, you can see how that narrative is politically powerful.
And this is where rhetoric turns into actual policy. In February 2025, Trump signed Executive Order 1424. This wasn't just talk anymore. It actively cut U.S. aid and, this is the critical part, it created a special resettlement program specifically for white South Africans, labeling them as victims of racial discrimination.
The impact of this was immediate and pretty stark. The total U.S. refugee cap was slashed to just 7,500 people for the whole world. And almost every single one of those spots was reserved for people eligible under this brand new program. I mean, that is a dramatic and incredibly targeted policy shift.
Now, the third pillar was a major escalation. Trump's administration started framing modern South Africa as a communist tyranny. Historians were quick to call this fiction, but, behind that really dramatic language was a very real American fear that South Africa was getting way too close to Washington's big rivals, China and Russia.
So, there you have it, the three pillars: genocide claims, a targeted executive order, and accusations of communism. It's a powerful story, for sure, but the big question is, does it actually match reality on the ground?
And this right here is where that official narrative really starts to unravel. So let's put the claims aside for a second and just look at the facts.
Okay, so on one side you have Trump's claim of a white genocide, but then you look at the official data from South Africa, and it shows that between 2020 and 2024, most victims of violent farm crimes were in fact black. The reality is just so much more complex than the simple, racialized narrative being pushed.
And look, it's not just the data telling a different story. South African officials have pushed back and pushed back hard. The Minister of International Relations, Ronald Lamola, flat out called the whole narrative political fiction. And what's really crucial here is that even leaders who represent white Afrikaner communities have rejected Trump's claims.
Okay, so if the official reasons don't really add up, what's the real motivation here? Well, this is where we move away from the public statements and into the high-stakes game of global geopolitics.
The source material points to four key reasons that aren't being said out loud. First, to weaken the BRICS alliance. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which Washington sees as a rising competitor. Second, to retaliate for that ICJ case against Israel. Third, to punish South Africa for its ties with countries like Iran. And finally, to push back on calls for reforming the UN. This is about power, not just farmers. And that pressure campaign quickly turned economic. In July 2025, Trump announced a huge 30% tariff on South African goods. And then he issued this broader threat, warning that any nation pursuing so-called anti-American policies could be next. I mean, that was a crystal clear message to the entire global South.
But here's the thing. The attempt to isolate South Africa seems to have completely backfired. The other BRICS nations, China, Russia, India, and Brazil, they immediately closed ranks. They framed Trump's actions as an attack not just on South Africa, but on the very principle of global cooperation. Turns out, South Africa was not alone.
And that brings us to the global fallout. Because this confrontation is so much bigger than just two countries. It's become a flashpoint that could genuinely reshape the world as we know it.
Now, here's the great irony in all of this. Trump's attempt to assert American dominance might actually be speeding up the very thing Washington is most afraid of. This whole showdown could accelerate the creation of a parallel financial system, push more countries to trade in their own currencies, and ultimately weaken the US dollar's dominance on the world stage.
So you have the G20, an organization that was literally designed to be the premier forum for international cooperation, and now it's at a breaking point. What started as an attack on just one nation could end up splitting the world into competing factions, which would effectively end the era of uncontested American leadership.
What we're seeing is a messier, more complicated, multipolar world emerging right before our eyes. The goal might have been to reassert American power, but it may have just unified its rivals instead. Which leaves all of us with the ultimate question. As this new world order starts to take shape, who is going to get to write the rules?